Welcome everybody back to another episode. My name is Dwyan. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. In today's video, we're going to look at immigration. I did that in the last video. This video though, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and I'm going to look, first of all, let's put immigration into some context. So we got to look at the history of immigration. Don't worry, that sounds like it's going to be long. It's only going to be a couple of slides, I promise. But I think it's important to have that context. We're also going to look at the numbers in terms of immigration. How many people are immigrants in the United States of America compared to the total population? Where do they live? And what are their educational levels? And then at the end, we're going to look at probably the most important question, or the question that I'm most interested in. Do immigrants who are foreign born, what impact do they have, if any, on the native born population of this country, particularly when it comes to Black Americans? So it's going to be interesting. I got a couple of reports to show you that go into detail about this topic. I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very informative. I hope you guys stick around. Let's get to it now. Okay, so as you can see on the screen there, we have the immigrant share of the US population. So this is to provide context, right? Since 1850 right up until 2022, it shows you the relationship between the US population that is foreign born versus the entire population. So you can see that in 2022, we have 46 million immigrants. Out of a population of 333, that means 13.8% of the US population is foreign born. That's how we should get that in. So in terms of the history, you can see that you have a comparable percentage of foreign born versus native born back in the late 1880s and early 1900s. As you can see there, it peaked in 1890 with 14.8%. And that was really the first wave of, I would say, mass immigration into the country back then. Then you have a second wave after 1890 that went up until roughly 1910 and so forth. And then you see after the First World War, it goes down tremendously. And it hits the lowest point at around 4.7, as you can see there back in 1970. And then suddenly, as you can see, since 1970, it's just been going up. And I would argue that this graph doesn't show 2023, but I think when 2023 numbers come out, I suspect that it probably will be the highest ratio between foreign born and native born immigrants and native population that we've seen in the United States. So that gives you sort of like an overall history. So remember this, there's 47 or 46 million immigrants out of a 330 million population in the United States, which means it's roughly 13.8%, right? Now, in terms of who's been coming in, well, we have a very nice chart that actually shows you where people came from into this country, right? So I think you see the first wave there that we talked about. It was pretty much Northern and Western Europe. You know, they were predominantly overwhelming. Germany, Ireland, United Kingdom, Norway, Sweden. These were the predominant one in the first wave. Then in the second wave, you have sort of South and East Europe, right? Italy, Hungary, Austria, Russia, Poland, and then also the United Kingdom, a few more Germans and the Irish as well. Okay, so that's interesting. And you see that I did a video actually with Thomas Rousseau, who's the founder of the Patriot Front, and I encourage you to check it out. I think it was an interesting video, what he had to say. But he talked about this. He talked about how America was basically, you know, only bringing in people from European descent right up until the 1960s. And he's correct, as we see in the chart. It was predominantly a country for Europeans, right? Particularly, North and West Europe and Southern Europe. The Eastern Europeans sort of came in on the second wave, as you can see there. Okay, but this is how the country was set up. Now, it didn't mean, as you can see there were still people from Latin America and Asia and Africa and the Middle East, as you can see, but the numbers are very, very low. Those people must have been really sort of handpicked and carefully picked to come into the country. And then you have this modern era of immigration, as you can see right there on the top. Let's zoom into that. 1965 to 2024, Congress changes a law that opens up immigration in this country, and as we saw, boom, immigration really, really, really started to go up and up. It's been going up since 1970, as you can see there, right up in terms of the ratio of immigrants to the population, right? And now we have 47 million immigrants in this country. And by the way, when I say immigrants, I mean the whole thing. The illegal versus lawful, unauthorized, everybody who is in the country and who was not born in the country is an immigrant. Okay, so we're gonna look at the illegals or the unauthorized in a minute, but right now this is encompassing everybody. And as you can see there quite clearly, that Latin America, and in particular Mexico, more specifically Mexico, is really where we've had the majority of people come in from since 1965 up until now. Mexico by far, and it makes sense. I mean, Mexico is a huge country and it borders all those southern states. All those southern states have a border with Mexico. So it kind of makes sense. It makes you wonder, well, what's going on in Mexico that so many people would want to come in? Well, again, that's something not for this video, but just know that Mexico by far is where most of the immigrants are coming in from. And of course, right next to them, those are the top 10 lists there. You see China, India, and really China, India, the Philippines, Cuba. This has also been happening recently in the last 15-20 years. In fact, during the 2010s, I believe, we saw people from China, India, Southeast Asia basically overtake Latin America in terms of the amount of people that were coming into this country on a yearly basis. So that's interesting too, But as you can see there, more than half, a little over half of the immigrants in this country are from Latin America, and the majority of them are from Mexico. So that's an important point to remember as we now go on this journey to really understand what's going on here with immigration and whether it affects the native-born populations. Okay, we've looked at the numbers. We've seen where the immigrants come from in terms of the countries that they come from and the numbers in which they've come in. Now, what about the educational level of immigrants, right? How are they coming in? What type of education? Well, as we can see here, the educational attainment amongst U.S. immigrants in 2022. Okay, the sources are all listed at the bottom for those of you who are interested in looking and verifying, or fact-checking or whatever. Now, this is a very interesting thing to look at. I'm sure it's up on the screen there. You guys can take a look at it and see what the educational levels are for everybody who's coming into this country. It's done by region rather than country. It would have been nice to have done the country, but it does do one country there, which is Mexico. And obviously the reason why it does that is because what did we learn before? We learned before that the majority of people who come into this country as immigrants since 1960, the overwhelming majority of people have come from one country, Mexico. Okay, and that's very important, as you can see there with the numbers. So, a couple of things that I think is important. I already talked about Mexico. Let me come to that in a minute, but the red box above, I think, is also interesting. I thought it was an interesting number. Look at that. People with bachelor's degree or more the people, the immigrants who are coming in, the foreign-born population, is comparable to the U.S.-born, which I thought was interesting. You would think that people are coming to America. America has all these opportunities, and you would think that the majority of Americans would have bachelor degree or more, but no, it's comparable to the people coming in. In fact, if you look below, you'll see that in certain places, particularly Asia, Central, South, and East Asia, right? Basically the whole of Asia, you can see that those immigrants who are coming into the country from that region of the world are highly educated. Like the majority of them have bachelor's degrees or more coming into the country. Now, it's also possible that they receive those, obviously they might have gotten those degrees here in the United States of America, but still, it just shows you the mentality and what people are striving for. Now, when you look at Mexico and Central America, you see that it's a completely different story. It's the opposite story, right? And remember, these are the majority of people who are coming into the country, and this is a key point. So the majority of people who are coming in the country are from Latin America, in particular Mexico, and they are coming with basically not even a high school. The majority of them not even a high school education or diploma, right? And then if you include high school graduate or less, it's 75%, as you can see there, are coming in on that. So what does that mean? It means basically that these people, in particular Latin America, a lot of them are coming in under perhaps very desperate situations, far desperate than the people who are coming in from Asia, for example. And they're in survival mode, and they have to work. They have perhaps large families. They have to do all that. And I think that, that's the reality of the situation, but the reality also is that if they don't have even a high school graduate, then chances are these people are going to start to fill what we call low skilled or unskilled jobs, right? These are jobs where you don't require a degree, right? And again, that's another important point when we start to look at what impact does immigration have in particular on the Black community. That's what we're focusing on here. What impact does immigration have on Blacks in America, the native-born Blacks in America, right? And I think this is a very, very important point, right? Because Mexico and basically Latin Americans who are coming to this country don't have degrees, the majority of them, and therefore they will only qualify for unskilled or low-skilled work that doesn't require a degree. I'm going to say it again, and this is important as we move forward. So what's next? Next is, well, where are these people, where are the immigrants located? Okay, so that's another one. And again, we're talking about all immigrants, right? Whether they are unauthorized or authorized, illegal or legal, right? And as you can see there, unsurprisingly perhaps, that the immigrants, the majority, their populations are really in the metropolitan or major cities in the United States, right? Boston, Philadelphia, Miami, Atlanta, New York, Chicago, as you can see there. The major cities in the United States of America, on both the East and the West Coast. This is where the majority of these immigrants go and reside, right? Now, why is that important? Well, I'll show you why. We're going to look at this data map here. Okay, this is a very important map. Now, here is Illinois, the state of Illinois, right? And as you can see here, I've broken it down by race, right? It doesn't include Hispanic or Latino. We're looking at black and white. And I want to show you guys something that I think is very interesting, okay, and very telling. So you can see right now it's on white, which means it's, and the legend is here at the bottom. So you can see the dark green, as the green gets darker, that's where the concentration of white people are in Illinois. And as you can see, they're pretty much in the western part of Illinois, right? They're in the western part of Illinois and maybe in the north, okay? Very around Chicago and in the Chicago and here in the south, you know, Chicago Heights, no, that's Indiana. Chicago Heights down here, they're not really there, you know. Now, if we click on black, guess who's in those areas? Black people. They're hardly in the other areas, right? So it's very interesting. Right here in right here, and remember, this is interesting because I'm telling you that the immigrants are in these major cities, and I'm going to put a link to this demographic data map. I think it's a wonderful map. It's a wonderful tool, and you can go in yourself and you can see every single one of those metropolitan areas is segregated, black and white. Blacks don't live where the whites live. Whites don't live where the blacks live, right? Of course, you have some whites who live where the blacks are and some blacks who live with where the whites are. But generally speaking, you see the situation here, right? Let's just do one more. I'm not going to do all the cities, obviously, but let's go to Atlanta. So this is the state of Georgia. All here. This is the state of Georgia, right? So right now, I'm on the white, right? The total population, people who are white alone. As you can see, the whites are pretty much all over Georgia, but there are certain pockets that they're not. Right here, around Atlanta, okay, although you do see them concentrated a little bit up here. This is probably the suburbs or outskirts of Atlanta. But over here, they're not here, in the southern part. There's little spaces here, Columbus, but that might be, okay, that's Columbus, Georgia, okay. Albany, I don't know what this area here is called on the west, but this is where the whites are not, in the light green areas. Now, let's click to black. Remember this map. Let's click the black. You saw the difference? The blacks are where the whites are not, period. And I'm telling you folks, you can do this for every single major city, and you can do it for every state. Go and zoom in and go and look at the counties and get deeper, because you can zoom in and see even on a county level, and you'll see that this country is de facto segregated still, right, in 2024, right? So I bring this up not to really highlight that aspect, because I think that speaks for itself. But the reason why I bring it up is in relation to immigration, because we've just seen that the majority of immigrants go to where? Areas where black people are. And this is going to be crucial in understanding the relationship between the immigrants and the black population, right? And again, in my previous immigration video, I advise you guys to really check that out. You'll see that this relationship, right? And I asked the question, does it affect the native born blacks in this country? Does immigration, mass immigration, affect them? Now let's look at the immigrants a little bit more and dissect the immigrant population and see what makes up the immigrant population. Who are the immigrants, right? So you can see here that unauthorized immigrants were 23% of the US foreign-born population in 22. So that's 23% of the total immigrant population, right? These are unauthorized immigrants. Okay. So as you can see at the bottom, it says the unauthorized immigrant population includes those with temporary protection from the deportation under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program, and temporary protected status, TPS, as well as pending asylum claims. Okay, so that's what's considered unauthorized. So they're not fully lawful immigrants, but they have some sort of they have a protective status. They can't, you can't just throw them out of the country, okay? because they're already in, and as I said, they're in areas that are known as sanctuary cities. So they have this temporary protective status. Okay. So as you can see there's about 11 million unauthorized immigrants. Okay, and remember we saw the figure in the beginning of 46 million. So out of that 46 million, 11 million of them, which is about 23% of them, 1 in 4 immigrants are unauthorized. Okay. And the rest of the immigrants are lawful immigrants. And I think that, we need to remember this, that 3 out of 4 immigrants, the overwhelming majority of immigrants, okay, 3 out of 4 are lawful immigrants. They're either naturalized citizens, or they have lawful permanent residence, as you can see there, or they have some sort of temporary status, which is considered lawful, right? So as you can see there, that's the breakdown. So people tend to, look at immigrants and give them a bad name, or think that they're all illegal and stuff like that. No, the overwhelming majority of immigrants are lawful. So this is a paper that was put forward as kind of a study by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in May of 2024. So it's pretty new. And they looked at the labor force characteristics in 2023. Now they made more than the 2 conclusions or observations that I've put here, but these 2 are the important ones for my discussion right now. Okay. Number 1, foreign-born men continued to participate in the labor force at a considerably higher rate in 2023, 75%, than their native-born counterparts, 66.1%. Okay, and on the second point, you see in 2023, foreign-born workers were more likely than native-born workers to be employed in service occupations, natural resources, construction, and maintenance occupations, and in production, transportation, and material moving occupations, right? These are the so-called unskilled or low-skilled work where you don't necessarily need a degree. Okay, this is very important. And then obviously it says that, however, they were less likely than native-born workers to be employed in management, professional, and related occupations, in sales and office occupations. Now, this is very important. And the reason why is this. These are the service occupations by racial group. Now, so you remember, foreign-born workers, as you see here, were more likely than native-born workers to be employed in service occupations. And it lists what those service occupations are. So here we see the percentage of every racial group employed in these service occupations. Yes, employed in these service occupations. And you can see clearly that black people, almost 1 in 3 black people, are employed in these service occupations. So if foreign-born workers are more likely to be hired and they have in service occupations than native-born Americans, then you can see clearly that in the black community, which I've already showed you where immigrants tend to go in the first place and reside, then you can clearly see that the black community is not only going to be affected by immigration, it is going to be the most affected, okay, by immigration. And this is important for us to understand, particularly when we know now that the majority of people who are coming into this country are from Latin America, and the majority of them do not have a degree. Therefore, they are going to be more than likely in the service occupations. You understand what I'm saying? And here I show you the service occupations by racial group. And I hope this is clear, because to me it is, that mass immigration period does have an effect on the black community in America. Why? Because the majority, and let me just say it again, the majority of people who are coming in as immigrants are from Latin America, in particular Mexico, and the overwhelming majority of them have a high school graduates or less. They don't have a degree, therefore they are more likely to be in service occupations. And I've shown you the report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Let's go back to it, which says in 2023, not 1993, not 1850, in 2023, foreign-born workers were more likely than native-born workers to be employed in service occupations. And then I showed you that blacks in America are, first of all, by far, as you can see there, especially when compared to white, almost double, black Americans are in these occupations. 1 in 3. So there is something to what I'm saying, right? Black Americans are affected by immigration. I want to look at the National Bureau of Economic Research, because they came out with a working paper, I believe they call it, and let's look at it. Okay, let's look at it, folks. Here it is right here. Okay, and again, I'll put a link to this in the description so you guys can take a look at it. Let's look at this working paper. Look at what it says here. Immigration and African American employment opportunities. Immigration and African American employment opportunities. The response of wages, employment, and incarceration to labor supply shocks. Okay. Again, and here's the 3 people here, George, Jeffrey, and Gordon. Now, these are not black people trying to race hustle and trying to why everything about African Americans. Okay, let's look at George Borges. Here he is, George Borges. He don't look black to me. Okay, what does it say here about him? He's professor of economics at the Harvard Kennedy School. Okay, Gordon Hanson, University of California. Again, he looks white to me. Director of the Center of Pacific Economies, professor of economics. Okay, and then we have Jeffrey. Jeffrey is, what does it say here? He's the Ivan Harris Professor of Urban Policy, University of Chicago. So these are three white boys. Okay, and what do they come up with? Immigration and African American employment opportunities. The response of wages, employment, and incarceration to labor supply shocks. Okay, let's see what they came up with. Okay, again, let's just look at the abstract. Obviously, we can't go through all this, but let's look at some of the main points that I found. The first one is this: the employment rate of black men, okay, and particularly low-skilled black men. Remember, we're looking at low-skilled and or unskilled, right? People who don't have a degree. Remember? So it's the employment of black men in general, but particularly low-skilled black men fell precipitously from 1960 to 2000. Remember, 1960 to 2000, we saw in the graph. Let's go back to it. That's when immigration started moving up. Let's go back to the report. It fell between these years. At the same time, the incarceration rate of black men rose markedly. This paper examines the relation between immigration and these trends in black employment and incarceration, using data drawn from the 1960 to 2000 censuses. So It doesn't have the new data. It doesn't have new data, because it stops at 2000, but it's still useful to take a look at what they found. We find a strong correlation between immigration, and again, remember, these are 3 white boys. We find a strong correlation between immigration, black wages, black employment rates, and black incarceration rates. As immigrants disproportionately increased the supply of workers in a particular skill group, the wage of black workers in that group fell, the employment rate declined, and the incarceration rate rose. Okay, and then he says that our analysis suggests that a 10% immigrant-induced increase in the supply of a particular skill group reduced black wage by 4%. It lowered the employment rate of black men by 3.5 percentage points, and it increased the incarceration rate of blacks by almost a full percentage point. Now I know what you guys are thinking. Correlation doesn't mean causation, right? But remember, all these are economic people. They look at data, they look at the empirical data, and they just go by what the data tells them, right? So yes, they're not saying that immigration caused it, but they are saying that there is a correlation between all these 3 things, okay? And they even say in this that this hasn't really been studied. It hasn't really been studied. Now, I want to point out something else that's interesting. That this whole paper is very, very interesting. So we've talked about this paper examines the relationship between immigration and black employment outcomes. The empirical analysis, just the data, shows that immigration has indeed lowered the wages of black. Our main interest, however, is on the behavioral consequences of this reduction of economic opportunities in the formal labor market. In particular, we investigate if the immigration-induced reduction in black wage may have encouraged some black men to exit the labor force and shift to illegal activities. Okay. We talked about the 10% immigrant-induced increase, reduced the black wage. We talked about that already. Now, it also affected white men, but obviously by a much, much smaller degree, because as we pointed out, only 16% of the white population is in service occupations, is in quote-unquote low skilled. Okay, it seems therefore that black is much more sensitive. Okay. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The study can obviously generate a great deal of controversy in the immigration debate and can easily be misinterpreted. As a result, we're extremely cautious in both the presentation and interpretation of the evidence. Although we've attempted to control further factors that may account for the large shifts in black employment and incarceration rates over a 4-decade period that we examine, it should be obvious that no study can control for all possible factors. Now here's the key, and I'm just going to read this last paragraph. It is equally important to emphasize that although the evidence suggests that immigration played a role in generating these trends, this is the key, much of the decline in employment or increase in incarceration in the black population, here it is, remains unexplained. Put differently, immigration seems to have had an effect, and this effect seems to be numerically important. But we would have witnessed, this is the key, we would have witnessed a sizable decline in black employment and a concurrent increase in black incarceration rates, even if there had been no immigration in the past few decades. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Oh, so immigration has nothing to do with it then? No. What they're saying is that immigration is not the only thing that caused it. But the evidence does show that immigration added to it, but it would have happened anyway. And that's very interesting, because they also mention here, again, I don't want to go too deep into the paper and make this video too long, but they also, and please guys take a look at it, it's 62 pages. It's not that bad. But they also start to talk about other things I mentioned earlier. They didn't encourage black people to go into illegal activities. They talked about crack cocaine. in the neighborhood and the sentencing issues and stuff. These are all things that I'm going to eventually talk about. But I think it's very interesting. This is a very interesting working paper. And for me, it's clear that this needs to be studied. And that's another thing they said, that this hasn't really been studied. And here are 3 white boys looking at the data, and this must have jumped out to them, which is why they decided to go forward and really look at the data and bring some of these things out. But it hasn't really been studied. And I think that it is very important that it is studied. And I'm definitely going to be looking to this more and more and more and more. This is very, very interesting to me. Okay. With that, I think that's it. I think I've put a lot out here right now. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it very much. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Take care. Love one another. Be safe.